Breakfast still included that richly scented brown gravy from last night's dinner. His current pollution level was dangerously high, so naturally he wouldn't risk it again. Fortunately, there was plenty of other food on the table. He casually took a piece of white bread, tore off a piece and put it in his mouth, chewing it slowly. Ariel, I'm sure you already know. Today we're having a pre-wedding party at sea. Grace's voice couldn't hide her excitement. The party will last all night. You're going to love it. Non paused her chewing. All night. Spending the night at sea. She nodded, expressing her anticipation with a smile. Her legs felt a little itchy. She couldn't help but reach out and scratch her thigh. Something flashed in her mind. Suddenly she felt something was off. Was the frequency of itching on her legs a little too high? If it were normal circumstances, she wouldn't have paid attention to these small things. But this was a strange tale's world. Missing any detail could cost her life. When does skin feel itchy? Skin disease, dryness and dehydration, could it be? She remembered the second rule. Remember, you are a mermaid. Mermaids need to replenish water in time. But from yesterday until now, she had been replenishing her water regularly. Even to be sure, she soaked in water for a long time last night, that her legs were still itching uncontrollably. This only meant that she hadn't replenished her water in time. This meant her current situation was very dangerous. She was a mermaid. Sunon paused. Did replenishing water mean? After breakfast, they set off for the beach and boarded that huge ship. This ship was very luxurious, with 3 floors. The bottom floor was the bedrooms. The first floor was the kitchen and storage room. The second floor was a large hall for gatherings. On the deck were the sailors busy at the helm. Sunon, for the first time, boarded this kind of ship, but she had no intention of enjoying it. From yesterday, she had learned that the pollution was only related to the sea. Here, it meant her pollution level was at risk of increasing at any time. She had to find a way to suppress the pollution level as soon as possible. Sunon took a rough tour of the ship. The bottom floor was a storage room. The entrance to the bottom was secured by a large lock. As she passed by, a slight breeze came through the door crack. She stopped and approached the entrance, slightly pushed open a gap. It was pitch black inside. She couldn't see anything. Only vague female voices came from below. Sunon became suspicious. Before she could react, a maid appeared from nowhere and called out to her, Miss Ariel, Princess Grace is looking for you. What are you doing here? Sunon turned around. A maid looked at her and asked. She obediently followed the maid away. It was daytime now. Everything was like an undercurrent beneath the water's surface. Only when night fell and everything was quiet would those whirlpools reveal themselves. They arrived at the first floor hall. It was decorated lavishly. Everywhere there were delicacies and fine wines. People were toasting each other, dancing gracefully in the center of the hall. Grace was very excited when she saw her, pulling her, wanting to teach her to dance. Sunon declined her offer. Her feet weren't capable of dancing. Grace was in a good mood and wasn't upset. She let go of her hand, allowing her to do as she pleased. She herself danced a waltz with Eric. At this moment, everyone's attention was on the prince and princess in the hall. Sunon didn't like such a lively scene. She went to the deck to get some air. At this moment, the sun was shining brightly on the sea, sparkling. Waves rolled and hit the side of the ship, stirring up countless small white bubbles. Sunon frowned, thinking, how could she get some seawater without drawing attention? Thinking it over, perhaps the rule was referring to replenishing with seawater. After all, she was a deep-sea fish. Deep-sea fish can't survive in fresh water. Sunon was staring at the sea, thinking of a plan. Suddenly, she heard a vague sound. Ariel. Sunon frowned. The sound seemed to be coming from the sea. She focused her gaze on the sea, and quickly discovered something unusual. In between the gaps of the waves, there were several faces floating up and down. If she hadn't looked carefully, an ordinary person would easily miss it. She was shocked, and stared intently. The few faces emerged from the water. Seeing that Sunon had finally noticed them, they waved excitedly towards Sunon. Ariel. The people before her were beautiful and lively. Their long, thick hair hidden beneath the surface, like a few blurry black shadows. Occasionally, a flash of fishtail could be seen on the surface. They were mermaids, Ariel's sisters. Sisters, why are you here? Sunon took out her notebook and wrote down these words, and held up the book to ask. The leading mermaid saw this, tears welling up in her eyes. As they rolled down, they transformed into shimmering pearls, dropping into the deep sea. Ariel, you silly girl. You actually willingly transformed into a human for a man, even losing your voice. The mermaid's language was like melodious singing. Kid, love be more important than your long life and freedom? Of course not, but she had no choice. The mermaids in front of her moved freely through the waves, their golden hair reflecting a dazzling brilliance under the sunlight. In the Little Mermaid story, Ariel once had a chance to live. Her sisters made a deal with the witch, bringing her a dagger. As long as she killed the prince and smeared his blood on her legs, she could transform back into a mermaid and return to the sea. She wondered if that would also be possible in this strange tales world. Sunon wouldn't give up on any possibility. She lowered her head and quickly wrote sorry on her notebook. Sisters, I was too willful. I regret it very much now. Can you ask the witch for me if there is a way to transform back into a mermaid? The leading mermaid saw the words she had written. A look of excitement appeared on her face. Ariel, I'm glad that you are not completely hopeless. You should have known that love is just an illusory cloud in the sky. Another mermaid also chimed in. We'll go find the witch now, to find a way for you to turn back into a mermaid. But Ariel, how will we let you know? There were many people around during the day, and Sunon was afraid of being discovered. So she lowered her head and wrote, I'll be waiting for you here at midnight tonight. I'll be waiting for you here tonight at midnight. The mermaids said their farewells reluctantly. Their beautiful, glittering fishtails flashed through the waves, and soon disappeared. Ariel, what are you doing alone on the deck? Eric's voice sounded behind her. Sunon was slightly stunned. She clenched the notebook in her hand and turned around. During the day, Eric was dashing and handsome. His smile was bright. It's windy here. Be careful not to catch a cold. His gaze swept behind her. Where the mermaids were long gone, only white waves rolled. Strange. I thought I saw a fishtail just now. Eric turned back to look at Sunon. Ariel, did you see anything unusual? Sunon shook her head and wrote, besides the waves, I didn't see anything. A meaningful smile appeared on Eric's face. Have you heard of mermaids? Sunon's heart skipped a beat, but she showed a blank look on her face. They are the most wonderful creatures in the ocean. I think so. No creature can surpass their beauty. In Eric's eyes, there was a hint of suppressed fanaticism, which made Sunon even more alarmed. If I could get a mermaid in my lifetime, Sunon's heart tightened. His voice suddenly stopped. Sunon wrote, mermaids are just legendary creatures. The fanaticism in Eric's eyes faded little by little after seeing the words she had written. He glanced at Sunon with considerable displeasure. His gaze turned gloomy for a moment, but he quickly changed back to an impeccable smile. Of course, I was just saying, but Sunon wouldn't believe his words. Eric's expression told her that he was clearly determined to have a mermaid. A person with such a perverted interest. How could he resist such a legendary creature? All right, Ariel, it's windy here. Let's go back inside the cabin. Eric stretched out his hand to her with a suave gesture. Sunon lowered her head and smiled shyly, putting her hand in his palm. At midnight, the party had lasted all day, until it just ended. From day till now, her pollution level had increased another 5%, although the increase was not fast. A pollution level as high as 45% made Sunon anxious. This was only the second day. She had to speed up and find a way to reduce the pollution level. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to stay conscious until the 5th day. The people on the ship had been partying all day, and were now undoubtedly exhausted. They were already sound asleep. It was a good opportunity for her to act. Sunon stood up, just about to go out, when her legs suddenly became extremely itchy. She couldn't help but reach out and scratch her legs hard. While the itching was relief, she could clearly feel that, as her actions ended, warm liquid was slowly flowing down her legs on a white skirt, soon stained with a liquid color mixed with yellow and red. Her skin was now like a piece of paper soaked in water. It would tear open with just a slight touch, but her legs were still itchy. This itch seemed to be coming from her bones. She couldn't help but scratch down hard, scratching fiercely for a moment of relief. She was probably in a state of severe dehydration. All day today, Eric had been by her side, and she simply couldn't avoid his gaze. To get seawater, she gritted her teeth and endured the pain, stepping out and heading outside. Now was her last chance. Her legs rubbed against the lining of her skirt, each movement only worsening her wounds. Before long, the entire lining of the skirt was damp and sticky, and stuck to her legs. Fortunately, these past 2 days had been like walking on a knife's edge, and Sunon's tolerance for pain was far beyond that of ordinary people. She gritted her teeth and walked out of the bedroom. The resting area was located on the 2nd floor of the ship. Outside was a long corridor. Candles for lighting were placed on both sides of the corridor. The corridor was empty, quiet and still. By the time Sunon reached the deck, her whole body was already soaked in cold sweat. The moon at sea was very bright, illuminating everything on the deck. Thanks to this, she noticed something wrong right away. The deck was clean and tidy during the day, but at this moment, not far from her feet, lay a fish that had been dead for who knew how long. Its dead fish eyes were rolling back, and the scales on its body reflected a cold, silver light in the moonlight. Her current location was right in front of a huge wooden barrel that blocked her view. On the side of the ship's wall were live buoys and ropes. Sunon breathed softly and peeked out her head. She was so shocked by the scene before her that her eyes widened. Dear Eric, who was suave and dashing during the day, she could tell it was him, only because they were wearing the same clothes. Not long ago he had just smiled and separated from her, but now he had completely changed. Eric was on all fours on the deck. His breathing was loud. A large pile of dead fish was scattered in front of him. He buried his head in the dead fish pile, feeding like a beast. The fish had been dead for who knew how long. The flesh was close to rotting. It looked like it had the texture of modeling clay. When Eric gently grabbed it, his fingers would sink into the fish's body. He kept stuffing the dead fish into his mouth with both hands, and sticky blood dripped from the corners of his mouth. She could vaguely see stuck between his teeth, fish scales sparkling like stars. He kept making slurping sounds in his mouth. Salt water dripped onto the deck, and the strong smell of fish mixed with the fresh sea breeze assaulted her senses. Sunon suddenly recalled the smell she had smelled on the Eric last night. She covered her mouth and nose, almost gagging. She began to hate why the moon was so bright tonight, allowing her to see everything so clearly. With Eric here, how could she get in contact with the mermaids? Sunon waited for another moment, but it seemed Eric had no intention of stopping. He still had his head down, constantly eating. Her heart grew restless. Sunon's legs couldn't stand for long. She wiped the cold sweat from her forehead, and couldn't help but move her body. With a clatter, "Who's there?" Eric's head, buried in the pile of dead fish, snapped up abruptly. His eyes, which were so dark that she could barely see the whites, looked coldly towards Sunon's direction. Where did that empty bottle come from? Sunon instantly broke out in a cold sweat. She had clearly checked her surroundings just now, and hadn't seen that empty bottle. A thought flashed in her mind, and she suddenly remembered something. Mr. Crow's curse. How could she have forgotten? She still had this unlucky debuff on her. Sunon gritted her teeth. She didn't care about the bottle she had knocked over. She had a strong feeling that if she was discovered by Eric in this state, it would definitely not be a good thing for her. That Eric was very alert. He had already stood up and was approaching Sunon's direction step by step. "Who is there?" Eric asked again. "Is it Ariel?" There was not a trace of panic in Eric's voice about being watched. Instead, there was a kind of ease, like a cat playing with a mouse. His voice was deliberately lowered, but it still couldn't hide the malice that was about to burst forth. "Ariel, is that you?" His voice became smug. Even though he hadn't seen Sunon, he seemed certain that the person spying was her. Eric calmly walked towards the corner where Sunon was hiding, as if he could already imagine how the girl would tremble with fear after he caught her. Although he couldn't enjoy her right away, if he just waited a few days, he could openly enjoy this delicious dessert. Before that, he just had to lock her up and let fear soak through her body. To brew the sweetest fruit, Eric grinned, a smile stretching across his face, with fish paste, reeking of fish, still stuck between his teeth. "Sweetheart, it's you, isn't it? Don't be afraid." A bottle was suddenly thrown out with force, crashing into the side of the ship. It made a loud bang. Eric looked at the shattered bottle, stunned for a moment. Turning his head, he caught sight of the white skirt hem peeking out from the corner. The corners of his mouth stretched wider, a prey struggling in its last moments. Even the means of resistance seemed so adorable. He could no longer hold back and quickened his pace and rushed forward after seeing everything clearly. The curve of his smile froze. Where is she? Everything around was clearly visible under the cold white moonlight. A hook was nailed into the floor, with a piece of torn white skirt hanging from it. But apart from that, there was nothing. How could no one be there? Eric looked around suspiciously, his nostrils flaring, trying to find traces of the spy. But after all, this was on a ship. The sea breeze and the strong fishy smell had long since scattered any lingering scent of the spy. He soon suddenly noticed the huge wooden barrel that could hide a person. His smile returned once again. "Sweetheart, are you playing hide and seek with me?" Eric deliberately left, moving elsewhere to look for his prey, thinking they had survived, only to fall back into despair at the moment of hope. What a wonderful thing that would be. He strolled around the deck, finally impatiently returning to the same spot. "Sweetheart, let me guess. Are you perhaps?" He twitched his mouth, his expression becoming particularly ferocious with excitement. Eric reached out and lifted the lid of the barrel. "You're here, aren't you?" The smile on his face froze once again. The barrel was completely empty. There was no one there at all. How could this be? Missing twice in a row. Eric inevitably became agitated. How could she not be here? Where is she? Where is she? He began to search all over the deck, but Sunon seemed to have vanished into thin air. Not here either. Where is she then? He circled the deck unwillingly, searching round and round, but still came out empty. "Consider yourself lucky." Eric huffed in dissatisfaction. His pitch-black pupils rolled in his sockets. Then he grinned. "So what if you escaped? In a few days, you'll still be in the palm of my hand." He had filled his stomach tonight. Eric yawned. A wave of sleepiness washed over him. He simply left, and Sunon, who was supposed to be hiding behind the barrel that had vanished, was now tightly gripping a rope in her hand. Beneath her was the turbulent sea, clamoring to swallow her whole. The reason she had thrown out the empty bottle wasn't for any other reason. She simply wanted to divert Eric's attention. She didn't need much, just a few seconds were enough. While Eric was distracted, she climbed over the side of the ship, and sliding down the rope was dangerous. That Eric in that state was clearly much more dangerous. The waves surged beneath her. The lower half of her body was soaked by the incoming waves. Sunon's wounds on her legs hadn't healed, and she was prepared for the excruciating pain. But the pain she had imagined didn't come. The seawater crashing against her body actually made her feel relaxed and comfortable. The wounds on her legs slowly healed, and the itching that had been troubling her also gradually subsided. If she had to describe it, it was like the parched and cracked earth finally receiving a heavy rain. The earth was nourished and regained its vitality. It seemed that the so-called water replenishment was just as she had guessed. It had to be seawater. Current pollution level, 50%. Along with that came a pollution level warning. 50 was an extremely dangerous number. Her legs had returned to normal. Eric should have left already. She pulled at the rope, just about to climb back up when she suddenly heard someone calling her name, Ariel.